of the Excise Tax Act 2005, number 8 of 2005, hereinafter referred to as the Act, provides that the goods specified in the second schedule to the Act are exempt from excise tax. And whereas Section 4(5) of the Act authorizes the Minister to amend the first and second schedules of the Act by order published in the Gazette. And whereas Section 4(6) of the Act provides that an order made under subsection 5 shall be subject to affirmative resolution of Parliament. And whereas on the 3rd day of February 2020, the Minister made the Excise Tax Second Schedule Amendment Order 2020. And whereas it is desirable that the Excise Tax Second Schedule Amendment Order 2020 be affirmed, be it therefore resolved as follows: that this order may be cited as the Excise Tax Second Schedule Amendment Order 2020, and 2, the Excise Tax Second Schedule Amendment Order 2020, which was laid on the table of the House on February 2020. 10th of February 2020 is affirmed. Mr. Speaker, Section 4(5) of the Excise Tax Act number 8 of 2005 gives the Minister for Finance the authority to amend the first and second schedules of the Excise Tax Act. The first schedule deals with the rates of excise to be applied, while the second schedule deals with the exemptions. In Section 4(1), the rates of excise are imposed by order, but subject to the affirmative resolution of the House. As a means of enhancing the quality of service provided in the tourism sector, specifically the cruise subsector, in the 2019 budget address, government announced a waiver of duties and taxes on buses for use in the cruise tourism subsector. Mr. Speaker, government continues to engage cruise executives as we seek to increase cruise business. So far, our efforts have largely been successful, and so to maintain and increase the business, we will take action to improve the quality of service that we deliver to our visitors. The measure before the Parliament today is to remove the excise tax at the point of importation on buses which sit between 21 and 29 people. The measure is aimed at improving the fleet of buses available for use in tourism taxi operations and organized tours. It is also geared at making the visitor experience more enriching, since the larger buses are more comfortable. The measure requires an amendment to the second schedule to the Act. A new paragraph K as follows. K. Motor vehicles falling under the customs tariff heading 8702 imported between 1st October 2019 and September 30th, 2020 for use in tourism taxi operations and tour services which seat 21 to 29 persons. I trust that this order will get the full support of the Parliament. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The motion is before the House for debate.
Mr. Speaker, I thank this Honorable House for coming to consensus on the measure before us. It is very important as we move to a more dynamic economy, we have to raise our standards in tourism. We must understand that the customer experience is key to having repeated visitors. This is an excellent opportunity for taxi operators and all those who earn a living in tourism to make the necessary investments to upgrade their fleet to afford visitors a more pleasurable and comfortable experience, and also to make more money. The onshore excursion experience is vital for the success of the cruise port development. So I encourage our taxi operators to take advantage of this opportunity during this specified period, because the measure ends on September 2020. I also wish to encourage the financial institutions and vehicle dealerships to have flexible, attractive plans so investors in the taxi business can take advantage of this opportunity afforded to them by the government of Dominica. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
This concludes the debate on the motion. I will now put the question. Be it therefore resolved as follows. 1. This order may be cited as the Excise Tax Second Schedule Amendment Order 2020. 2. The Excise Tax Second Schedule Amendment Order 2020, which was laid on the table of the House on the 11th day of February 2020, is affirmed. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Value Added Tax Schedules Amendment Order 2020. Whereas the items set out in the Schedule 1 of the Value Added Tax Act 2005, number 7 of 2005, hereinafter referred to as the Act, are zero rated. And whereas Section 18 of the Act provides that the goods specified in Schedule 3 to the Act are exempt imports. And whereas Section 105(1) of the Act authorizes the Minister to amend the schedules of the Act by order published in the Gazette. And whereas Section 105(2) of the Act provides that an order made under subsection 1 shall be subject to affirmative resolution of Parliament. And whereas on the 3rd day of February 2020, the Minister made the Value Added Tax Schedules Amendment Order 2020, and whereas it is desirable that the Value Added Tax Schedules Amendment Order 2020 be affirmed.
Seconded.
Mr. Speaker, in the 2019 budget address, be it resolved as follows. Be it therefore resolved as follows. This order, what is wrong? This order may be cited as the Value Added Tax Schedules Amendment Order 2020. 2, the Value Added Tax Schedules Amendment Order 2020, which was laid on the table of the House on the that is what I know. I was right originally, yes. Thank you, because that's what my paper is. Yes. Mr. Speaker, in the 2019 budget address, 2 measures were announced which necessitates an amendment to the value-added tax order. The first measure relates to a decision to encourage the use of more environmentally friendly vehicles. This is part of our efforts at becoming the first climate-resilient nation. As such, a reduction in import duty and value-added tax on specific vehicles is proposed. The specific vehicles include electric buses under customs heading 8702.40, electric cars under customs heading 8703.80, and electric motorcycles under customs heading 9711.60.90. The 15% VAT is applied to these vehicles, and with the approval of this measure, the rate of VAT which will be applied is 0%. This measure is aimed at encouraging the use of more environmentally friendly vehicles. The second measure, Mr. Speaker, is intended to provide further support to vulnerable groups in our society. This government engages constituents constantly in the identification of the needs of the communities. We recognize that among the elderly and infants, there are some articles and equipment that can be used to provide better and more professional care. The goal is always to make the quality of life better for citizens. In that regard, the proposal is for the removal of VAT on the following items, effective September 1st, 2019. Adult diapers, baby wipes, bath boards, bath steps, bath lifts and hoists, shower chairs, and reclining beds. The draft order to effect the above amendments is subject to affirmative resolution pursuant to Section 105 of the Value-Added Tax Act 2005, Act number 7 of 2005. We do hope that the removal of VAT on these items will be passed on to the consumers. Mr. Speaker, to effect the measures, Schedule 1 of the Act, which deals with zero-rated supplies, is to be amended in paragraph 3 by inserting a new subparagraph 0 as follows. A supply of electric buses, electric cars, and electric motorcycles under the customs headings 8702.40, 8703.80, and 9711.60.90, respectively. Schedule 3 to the Act, which provides for exempt imports, is also being amended by inclusion of a new paragraph 16 as follows. The import of adult diapers, lifting chairs, bathroom aids, reclining beds, baby diapers, and baby wipes. The amendments are therefore submitted for the consideration of this Parliament.
The motion is before the House for debate.
Mr. Speaker, it's already 2 minutes. Just to highlight the importance of this measure. The use of adult diapers in this country has increased over the years because of the health condition of some of our seniors. And there are other items which have been highlighted by the Minister which are captured in this in this list of items all get towards alleviating the plight of our senior citizens and to allow them to be able to live a more comfortable life while they are still with us on earth. This is, in a simplistic arithmetic, this is 15% of the price of the goods. And I have no doubt that whether it's 1% or 10%, or in this case 15%, can be a considerable saving, both for people with children who need the diapers, or what we call popularly known as Pampers. Pampers is a brand, really, diapers. Who use these things and on wipes and so forth. That this concession, our hope and prayer is that the consumer can see a reflection of this savings when they go to the supermarkets or the shops, wherever they purchase the items. So this is 15% off. That's 15 cents on every dollar. And when you add it up, you know, it can be significant. And because we're responding to the concerns of the general public where this is concerned, because they've been raising this issue time and time again, and I'm hoping that at least this will help to reduce on the price to them. The issue of electric vehicles and I believe is a forward thinking approach, and this fits in well with Dominica's to reduce the emission of carbon gases into the atmosphere. Though we do not make much contribution to the emission of carbon gases in the atmosphere, looking at it from a relative term, but whatever action we can take, this government and this country is committed to doing so. And so, again, these are opportunities for the private sector, because with now making these vehicles more accessible by reducing the taxes associated with their importation, the issue of charging bays is an opportunity for the private sector to establish a couple of charging bays in Dominica so that people could charge their electric cars, you know. And so these are progressive policies, and I want to commend the Parliament, the House of Assembly for being part of this forward-thinking movement towards a greener economy, a more sustainable environment, the protection of the environment, a reverse in the degradation of our environment and our coastlines and our atmosphere. And this also gives Dominica a further reason to be able to speak with a sense of conviction to the international community when it comes to issues of climate change and the impacts of climate change on our nations. And this is why we continue to call on the international community, the developed countries, to take necessary actions to reduce on the emission of carbon gases in the atmosphere, reduce the temperatures of this world so that we can see a less frequency and ferocity of hurricanes and storms, which impact on our society, Mr. Speaker. So I think these are progressive policies, and of course the Parliament will see, as these years go by, as these months go by, a number of such initiatives coming to the Parliament as we seek to create a resilient nation, but also to be a conscientious and a conscious advocate for the environment and for the protection of the environment. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Allow me, like those who went before me, to offer congratulations to you and the Deputy Speaker in your new position. Let me also express sincerest thanks to the constituents of the Monjon Rivière constituency. I need to single out Grand Fond because they have really showed their appreciation for what the government has done in the constituency, and in their wisdom decided to give the government another chance, another opportunity to bring further development to the constituency. So let me thank them wholeheartedly for giving me that opportunity to serve. As we close this debate, I wish to emphasize the significance of these two measures that are before us today. I do not want to sound repetitive, but we are all aware of the benefits to be derived from transitioning into the electric vehicles. PM mentioned some of them, but I also need to remind you of the improved air quality due to no exhaust fumes, the reduction in respiratory illnesses, and the reduction in noise pollution. It also calls for more business opportunities in the transport sector and in the energy sector as well. With regards to the second measure, it is a testimony to this government's goal of always putting people first. Its ongoing efforts at assisting the senior citizens, the children, and individuals with chronic illnesses. I too can attest to what PM just stated, because I had to face a significant cost in getting adult diapers during the illness of my mom. So the removal of VAT will definitely reduce the cost of care for these vulnerable groups and provide relief for caregivers and for parents. I wish to reiterate, though, that the onus, however, is on the private sector to ensure that the savings are passed on to the consumer so that the vulnerable people in our society can truly benefit from this move. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity.
This concludes the debate on the motion, but I just wanted to make a short intervention that I would ask all honorable members to ensure that if they have their phones, that their phones are on silent, and just be careful and let's maintain that standard in this honorable house. I will now put the question. Be it therefore resolved as follows. 1. This order may be cited as the Value Added Tax Schedules Amendment Order 2020. 2. The Value Added Tax Schedules Amendment Order 2020, which was laid on the table of the House on the 11th day of February 2020, is affirmed. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the second reading of the bill shortly entitled International Business Amendment Act 2020.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the European Union, the EU, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation in Development, OECD, have requested additional changes to the International Business Company Act to meet their requirements. As a result of the amendments made to the legislation, as well as the decision to join the Base Erosion and Profit Sharing (BEPS) framework, Dominica was removed from the European Union negative list of non-cooperative tax jurisdictions. Both the international business companies regime and offshore banking regime are still under review by the Forum on Harmful Tax Practices, FHTP. Based on the further assessment of the OECD, additional changes are now being proposed. The changes proposed are in respect to the grandfathering provision as it relates to the intellectual property. Mr. Speaker, the amendment of the International Business Companies Act No. 10 of 1996, now before the Parliament, proposes a change to Section 109 of the said Act. The new provision is in respect of taxes applied to intellectual property assets within the context of the obligations to the OECD and the European Union. Intellectual property asset in this legislation means an intellectual property right, including a copyright, design right, patent, and trademark, and includes technical know-how, service marks, brand or image rights, and performance rights. Mr. Speaker, I commend this amendment to the Parliament for its consideration. I thank you.
The bill is before the House for debate.
Again, Mr. Speaker, Dominica is not an island unto itself. We are part of a global community. And there are, in this world, you have to sometimes follow the dictates of others. But that notwithstanding, we recognize our greater responsibility as a member of the international community and our own responsibility towards doing whatever we need to do and we ought to do to create a better environment to conduct business in a more transparent process globally. And therefore, we see this engagement with the OECD and the European Union as an ongoing discussion, because this world and the financial system is dynamic. It's dynamic. And every so often, there will be new decisions that have to be considered, new problems to deal with, and where actions are deemed to be necessary, Dominica stands ready to take those actions. And I must say, Mr. Speaker, here in the Parliament, that sometime last year or so, we raised concerns about the approach which the OECD and the European Union took in respect to some of the impositions on countries like us in the Caribbean. I want to report to the Parliament that they have taken due cognizance of this, and we have seen an improvement, a dramatic improvement, in the engagement of the OECD and the EU on these matters. There is a more cooperative, more respectful engagement. And I believe when there is more respectful engagement, more can be achieved together. Because we do not see this as a European issue. We see this as a global matter of which Dominica is part of, and which Dominica has a responsibility and a duty to play its part as a responsible country in the global context, Mr. Speaker. So while this is part of domestic law, and every one of our citizens and residents must respect this domestic law, it also forms part of an international crusade, which we fully subscribe to ensure that there is greater transparency and accountability in the financial system globally, Dominica included. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Mr. Speaker, let me thank all members of the House as we wind up this debate. And as the Minister of Finance, Prime Minister rightfully put it, a decade or so ago, we would say that the world is fast becoming a global village. We can now say that the world has become a global village with the advent of technology and, of course, the ease of travel. And while we small island states and smaller economies sometimes think that this measure is a bit harsh on us and we get the shorter end of the stick, we have to understand that with all what's going on, the issue of global terrorism and all of this, financial terrorism, that we do have to comply to play a part in this in this global village. So I want to thank everyone, both members. I guess silent means consent from everyone else. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yep.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled International Business Amendment Act 2020 be read a second time.
International Business Amendment Act 2020.
The bill now stands committed to a committee of the whole House to be considered clause by clause. House resumes. I have to report that the bill shortly entitled International Business Amendment Act 2020 passed the committee stage with minor amendments. The question that the report of the committee on the bill be adopted. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled International Business Amendment Act 2020 be read a third time and pass.
Mr. Speaker.
International Business Amendment Act 2020.
It has been moved. No, the bill has been read a third time and passed.
I move the second reading of the bill shortly entitled Income Tax Amendment Act 2020.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the Income Tax Act, Chapter 6701 of the 1990 Revised Laws of Dominica provides the legal framework for the administration of income taxes in Dominica. In the 2019 budget address, the Prime Minister announced 3 measures which seek to improve the benefits to homeowners by 1, increasing the maximum deduction for mortgage interest from $25,000 per annum to $30,000 per annum. 2, allowing a resident to deduct mortgage interest of $30,000 per year on one owner-occupied property and $15,000 per year on a second owner-occupied property. 3, taxing rental income separately from other income, and the application of a flat tax rate of 20% on net rental income after mortgage interest expenses, property insurance, and other non-capital expenses related to the property being rented is deducted. Mr. Speaker, the bill before the House seeks Parliament's approval for an amendment to the income tax to allow for the implementation of the above measures. The specific amendments are the following. Section 48A of the income tax is repealed and replaced with the new Section 48A as follows. A resident individual shall be entitled to a deduction in respect of any amount paid during basis period for a year of assessment by way of interest on a mortgage or loan in respect of the acquisition or improvement to 2 owner-occupied residential properties, but the deduction allowable for any 1 year of assessment in respect of the expenditure shall not exceed $30,000 on the first acquired occupied residential property and $15,000 on the second acquired occupied residential property. In this amendment, the mortgage allowance is increased from $25,000 per annum to $30,000 per annum. Further, the allowance can be claimed on 2 properties, albeit at different rates. Section 61 of the Act is also amended by inserting the following new subsection 3. Notwithstanding subsection 1, tax shall be charged for each year of assessment on the residential rental income of an individual at the rate specified in the 5th schedule after allowing for deduction of interest expenses related to the property and property insurance. This new section allows for the tax on rental income to be taxed differently. The rate to be applied is 20% and is provided for in the 5th schedule of the Act. Mr. Speaker, this government has tackled the issue of providing adequate and resilient housing from all angles. Since the passage of Hurricane Maria, our efforts have more than doubled as we attempt to ensure that every family can reside in a home which is safe and comfortable. We won't rest until we are satisfied that every family is without fear and knows that it is unlikely that their homes will be affected by major storms and climatic events or earthquakes. We will not rest until we have resettled every family located in a vulnerable area to somewhere that is safer. Thus far, a number of citizens are already occupying their new homes, and in the coming weeks, as more of the apartments and homes are completed, these will be handed over. The measure before the Parliament today will be of much benefit to the middle-income earners. This group of taxpayers, Mr. Speaker, very often do not meet the criteria that would apply to those of lesser income. But as Hurricane Maria taught us, we all must be able to take the necessary precaution and make our homes more resilient. This government is confident that the measures that we are considering today will help middle-income earners in that regard. The amendments are effective from January 1st, 2020. Mr. Speaker, I expect the full support of the House on these amendments and submit them for the consideration of the Parliament. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
This This bill is before the House for debate.
Mr. Speaker, the said bill before the House seeks to amend Section 48A of the Parent Act. Mr. Speaker, my contribution is based on my understanding of the bill. If passed, Mr. Speaker, my understanding, in fact, is that a residential property owner will be allowed deduction for interest paid on home mortgage in respect of 2 owner-occupied properties. For example, one may have a house in, say, Castle Bruce, and another house, say, in Kenfield. And you reside in both houses. That individual, that owner, would be allowed to claim a maximum of $30,000 and $15,000 annually in respect of mortgage interest paid. Mr. Speaker, on the surface, this amendment sounds good. But for owners with that luxury. However, one may ask, who are the Dominican residents able to afford or own 2 homes in order to benefit from this proposed measure? Well, I would imagine the more well-to-do. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, we know the overwhelming majority of homeowners in Dominica own 1 house. And who are they, Mr. Speaker? The working class, public servants to include teachers, policemen, nurses, some farmers. However, Mr. Speaker, we also know that many homeowners suffered damage to their homes from Hurricane Maria. Many of these homes did not have insurance, and those who had insurance, the majority of these homes were underinsured. Mr. Speaker, we also know that many of these homeowners are now forced to refinance their homes, or their mortgage, in fact, or take home improvement loans to repair their damaged.
Honorable Senator, I would like to just refer you to the bill at hand. Is the income tax amendment bill.
Yes, sir, that's where I am, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, so stay focused on the substantive matter, which is the bill.
Mr. Speaker.
Or if you want to build a case again, and that's where senior members come in place. You should be guided. If you want to make a case, you make a case quick and you move to the bill. So I'll allow you, and again, when I give you leeway, that's where we have major debate and back and forth. So stay focused on the substantive matter, which is the bill.
Mr. Speaker, you're not allowing me to make the
point. No, you will get your time. So
I am saying, Mr. Speaker, we are on the Income Tax Act, and this act refers to housing, mortgage interest on houses, and that's where I am. We know, Mr. Speaker, that many of our homeowners were forced to refinance their homes, build their homes, build it, rebuild completely. At the same time, you'll give me a chance, At the same time, Mr. Speaker, we are all aware of the fact that the construction costs post-Maria, it increased by 50% or more. Labor costs as well increased, we can say, by 100% or more. And we have semi-skilled and skilled workers who, before Maria and just after Maria, their labor cost was $60 to $80. But now, how much do they pay? Between $100 and $150, they ask. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, government is demanding that we build resilient homes, and I agree, I'm in total agreement with building resilient homes. But we have to understand, Mr. Speaker, there is a cost implication to building resilient homes. So accordingly, Mr. Speaker, one would expect a greater priority to be placed on assisting homeowners with one property, many of whom are single parents, mothers with children. Mr. Speaker, increasing mortgage interest deduction from $25,000 to $30,000 represent only about 20% increase as compared to the 40% or more increase in cost construction to the homeowners post-Maria. Put simply, Mr. Speaker, the newly built house that would cost in the region of $300,000, maybe before Maria, just after Maria, now costs the owner $400,000 to $450,000. It also implies that the homeowner now has to get a larger mortgage and pay higher interest. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I wish to suggest that the deduction to the single residential property homeowners be increased from $25,000 to $40,000 instead of the $30,000 as proposed in this bill. And that would be to provide more meaningful and needed financial relief to those who are most in need of it. Mr. Speaker, if this proposed level of relief, together with that proposed for the two residential property owners in this bill, would place much burden on the public purse, I therefore recommend that the implementation of this proposed relief of $15,000 on the two residential property owner be put off to a later period. Mr. Speaker, I wish to further add that adjustments to home mortgage interest allowance is not enough relief for persons making improvement to their homes and building new homes in the post-Maria environment. Homeowners, both existing and new, must be given duty-free concession on building material in order to help offset the increase in construction costs faced by the housing sector post-Maria. Mr. Speaker, there are too many of our brothers and sisters who have to leave because they do not get it here. They see an opening elsewhere and they move off. We want to prevent them from going, so we have to do things better for them. Mr. Speaker, our middle class, single residential property owners are fast disappearing. It is not fair that those who can afford to pay and occupy two or more homes, and that is, I'm referring to the more well-to-do people in society, wealthy, be given the advantage or further advantage over a financially stressed middle class through public sector policy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker,
I rise to...
I will speak. Mr. Speaker, this measure, in our mind, will certainly and absolutely benefit the middle class of Dominica. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, this is a request coming in based on consultation with the middle class, which the senator is not familiar with or does not know. When you look at Dominica, for example, Mr. Speaker, rental income is a major source of income for many Dominicans across the board. Across the board. People who have jobs, they are industrious, they are innovative, they think of their retirement days and that they cannot rely on one income, especially for their sunset years when they do the mathematics, what they will get at the end of the 30, 40 years they serve in the public service or the private sector, and therefore investing. And they go to the financial institution, take the risk, and acquire a loan to build a second house to rent. And there are scores of police officers in Dominica, and I applaud them, who have more than 2 homes or more than 1 home in Dominica. There are men, of course, darling, of course. There are many teachers I know of personally who own 2 homes. I know of nurses who own 2 homes. I know of medical practitioners, doctors who own 2 homes. I know farmers, hucksters who use their industry and their aspiration to acquire additional wealth. Invest. What this measure will do, Mr. Speaker, is that it will encourage the construction industry. It will give motivation for people to want to build more, because now there is a benefit. They can now get concessions that could accrue directly to them by way of refunds or a reduction in payments. I take note of the point that the Senator made about the increase in cost of construction, but that will address it, help address, because there's an increase. There's an increase. Well, based on our own analysis, people will benefit. People will benefit. So there is going to be a direct benefit for this. I believe too, Mr. Speaker, that in my view, the economy is not capturing sufficiently or accurately the extent of rental income on people's income and on the GDP of Dominica. Because in many instances, because people don't benefit from it, they may not indicate it. And what this will do is that it will encourage now for a number of people who are off the system, now that there is a benefit to come to the system and benefit from it directly. And construction jobs, people now have, because when you work in the public sector, you work for many years, you get a little gratuity, you still owe it on your house, you pay off the loan. Your salary now is a third of what it was, but your lifestyle remains the same. You have the same expenses and so forth. And so many people have been able to rely, in addition to their pension, on this rental income to survive. And I believe that this will benefit people directly. Because you see, and this came about by engaging people who consider themselves to be in the middle class. And I said, because they always complain, the government is not doing anything for the middle class. I said, well, tell me, what can the government do for the middle class? And these bright people told me, Prime Minister, and they wrote it down for me, sent me a paper and said, Prime Minister, we believe that, in our respectful view, this intervention can benefit the middle class. And having further consulted, I am certainly convinced that it will help the middle class as we know it. And it will also encourage people now to go into this rental, second home owning, because the second home owning is a big business. It's an industry by itself. In many countries like Barbados and the BVI and Anguilla and Bermuda and in the United States. And the United Kingdom is a huge industry. And I believe that we need to find our little niche and to see what can we do to continue to encourage that industry to grow, but to grow in a more formal manner. And, Mr. Speaker, I am a strong advocate against income tax. I understand the country needs it, and it would be reckless on the part of the Minister of Finance and the Parliament to remove it altogether without proper sound advice. But I believe fundamentally that people should be able, if you provide labor to somebody, then you should keep all of their labor's worth and let you do what you want with your money. And this is why we have invited the International Monetary Fund to assist us with technical assistance. And they have sent me a resume of a gentleman that they have identified, and I have given my no objection to his engagement, to come to review our income tax regime in Dominica and to see whether, if we are to eliminate income tax as we know it altogether, how do we go about replacing that revenue that we would lose from this measure? And if we cannot remove it altogether, can we not look at a flat rate of income tax in Dominica so that people can go home with more of their revenue? And so when we increase, Mr. Speaker, the tax threshold from when we came in 2000, we made it at 12,000. And I believe we took it, to 18,000? And then it now stands at 30,000. You cannot tell me that moving it from 12,000 to 18,000, that there are no benefits. There were benefits when you move it to 12,000 to 18,000. Because it means therefore anybody in Dominica who was earning $18,000 then would now pay no income tax. And everybody would get the first $18,000 of their salaries, of their income tax free. Now it is 30,000. And so 30,000 of your first $30,000 per annum that you earn is income tax free in Dominica. And those who get more than 30,000, your first 30,000 is tax free. And we went further to reduce the band. Our income tax was as high, Mr. Speaker, as 40%. When we came in 2000, 40%. And the lowest rate was 20%, I believe. 20%. We reduced it to 35. The highest now is 35, and the lowest now is 15. And I look forward to the day, Mr. Speaker, because I complain to the Minister of Finance every time I see him. Because when I look at my pay slip and I see how much income tax they take, and the first thing they take is that, I complain. Because I know what this $2,000 that they take, a lot of money, I think about $2,000 they take from me, and my salary is so small. And I work so hard. Sleepless nights, Mr. Clerk. And the tax people take, first thing they take income tax. Quite a bit. I don't know how much it is. 1,800 or 2,000, I don't know what it is, but it's significant. Around there. Around. You see, Mr. Speaker? But whatever it is, it's too much. You understand? And I know there are many citizens in Dominica who have the same complaint. But at the end of the day, this is our country, we have a contribution to make. But I believe that the government needs to move, and the country needs to move with greater speed towards the review of the income tax regime in Dominica, and to be advised on what actions can be taken by the country, by the government, to really give some direct income tax relief to our citizens so that they can keep their money and spend it how they see fit. So we believe that this measure is a step in the right direction. And we have to be careful, the advice we give, because giving advice is one, and this advice may sound exciting, it may sound politically expedient, but when you're dealing with these kinds of matters where the governance of the country, you have to be careful about not taking decisions purely because it may sound politically exciting. Because every decision a government takes, where you're going to affect your earnings, you have to look at the implications elsewhere in the system and to ensure that one decision does not cause a negative reaction to other areas. We have done the assessment. I believe that it is the first step, and I believe as time goes by, especially when this expert comes in, I intend to put all of these matters where income tax is concerned before him for his review and expert review, and to advise us comprehensively on our income tax regime in Dominica and what we believe a progressive nation that we are now should be implementing where income tax is concerned and people's labor, the monies that they pay, we pay them for the labor, Mr. Speaker. So this measure is welcome. It was a measure that was announced in the 2019-2020 budget address, and we are seeking, now we are ratifying here through this amendment bill, to give it the effect going forward beyond the 4 months, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Debate. We were told that the amendment bill is now before the House for debate. And it's interesting listening to the Prime Minister in response to Senator Ernie Johnson. Immediately, it's a pushback against what she's recommending in looking at the proposals and in making a call and a suggestion that maybe at this time it does not go far enough. If what the intention is relief to persons who own homes, have a mortgage, and persons who wish to own a second home and want to enter into the financial obligations to do that. And in the context of the debate, we're hearing a lot of things. It seems like we are now a country where more people own 2 homes than 1 home. And the question is this measure going to benefit more people if it does more for the owners of a single home than if it is extended to the owners of 2 homes? But the critical point made by Senator Ernie Johnson is that we had an event in Dominica. That everybody talks about, and particularly the members on the other side. Hurricane Maria. I don't know to what extent the members on the other side accept the fact that since Hurricane Maria, building costs, construction costs in Dominica have risen. And the point that Senator Johnson is making is in light of that steep rise in cost of construction, wouldn't we be better off if the government amends this measure in the interest of the homeowners to increase the mortgage income allowance, instead of from $25,000 to $30,000, to take it up to $40,000? We want to help people. We want to make it easier for them to be able to build their homes. We want to reduce the cost burden. But at the same time that we're doing this, we have all experienced the event that has probably allowed costs to rise significantly more than the relief that they will be gaining. So the relief that they will be gaining from what we're doing now for them will be wiped out by the increase of costs. Don't we have an obligation in these circumstances to reconsider what we're doing? On the suggestion and an advice of Senator John Finn. That's all this is, that's the spirit of debate in the House. We would like to engage on that level to ensure that what comes out of our interaction is the best for the people of Dominica. And I want to suggest this afternoon that Senator Ernie John Finn's proposal is good for Dominica. And we should do it. We should have the courage to sit down in committee and adjust the numbers. Instead of going from 20 to 25, we go up to 40%. Huh? All right? We go up that. Now we talk about wanting to help people. We talk about wanting to help the people with costs. And we talk about wanting to help people participate in an economy that is becoming increasingly dynamic. So we're providing breaks here. We are taking down the rate of income tax so that you have more disposable income. What about duty-free on building materials? What about duty-free on building materials? Why, you, no, 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds. Right, take 30 seconds. Take 30 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, let me say to the leader of the opposition that evidence has shown that when you take a decision like this to give waiver of import duties on things like building materials to build homes, more often than not, the people who you're targeting to benefit from this do not benefit from this, Mr. Linton. What I believe that we can look at, if we are serious about it, and which I have asked to be looked at, is the route of a rebate. But to go the route of a rebate will require very careful management and oversight, because these things open up a lot of loopholes that you have to be careful with and about. You get that?
Why I hope that you'll agree with me in principle as well. So it's not.
What I'm saying to you that I told you I took note of the point made by Senator John Finn. What I'm saying to you that this is a good start. This is a good start. And we must start somewhere. And so we're starting here. And,
all right, so you're starting there. You hope to finish. No, hold on. I'm hearing something different now, which I welcome. No, I welcome it. You know, I'm hearing that you're starting with you're starting with this. You'll finish with Senator John Finn.
I think, well, you know, I was making a good joke, but she made it. I mean, we dealt with her on December 6th. I mean, you know. but that's not a side. That's a joke. That's a joke. The whole idea is to put all of these things, and I appreciate this. The whole idea is to put all of these things before the consultant, the expert who's coming in to look at the whole gamut of the income tax system in Dominica. This is why I said. This is why I said this is the first start. But what this is doing here now, immediately, is to give a tax break to those who have taken the risk of investing in Dominica, because when you build a second home, that's an investment you're making. So we're giving them an immediate relief. And I do not think that we should delay that relief any further. That's the view of the government.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, just on this broad point of disposable income. I find you really taking your foot now. Eh? I find you stretching that joke. You're really stretching that joke now. You're really stretching that joke now. Yes. Yes.
Remember, I see in the back and forth, you lost maybe about 5 minutes. But I love the camaraderie, and that is what I was talking about when in the opening. I love it.
But Mr. Speaker, the time will come when you will start receiving your just desserts for this sort of the emergence of this sort of thing in the House, where rather than being under pressure for attempting to or bordering on imputing improper motives, we can. So I want to thank you. For that. We can engage in some debate. Mr. Speaker, let them behave. They can behave now. You can allow them to behave now. Settle down. You can settle down now. Settle down. I just want to finish this brief intervention on the question of the disposable income and whatever the government feels it can do to build that, to protect it, in the interest of a more dynamic, a more vibrant economy. At the end of the day, we talk about the taxation measures that we have implemented and those that the government has adjusted over the years in the interest of the taxpayers. But at the same time, there is still room for improvement, which is why we feel confident in asking the government to push this measure up from 25% to higher than that, to 40%, right? Because if you look at the broad sweep of taxes in Dominica, our tax to GDP ratio is the highest in the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. The average is 20. That was the ECCU reporting, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank reporting in 2018, that Dominica had a tax to GDP ratio of 27% versus the ECCU average of 20%. And yeah, it's relative, but it is the fact. It's the fact. It is what is reported. So the GDP dollar in Dominica is giving us 27 cents in taxes. The GDP dollar in Antigua is giving it 16 cents, right? They're making out. There is room for us to do more targeted interventions at a higher level on the very same matter that we're dealing with right now, which is why I applaud the recommendation from Senator John Finn. Thank you.
I just want to add a little to the discussion. This amendment to the Income Tax Act today is an additional measure of the government as expressed by the Prime Minister. The government has always looked at ways of giving a tax break, ensuring taxpayers have a little more money in their pocket, have a little more spending power, and allowing for this amendment also creates an incentive for added investment for and targeting our middle income people. Not only through the income tax regime, but the government housing loans interest rate has been the lowest in Dominica, and I believe it has also created an environment where it has allowed for more competitive rates, affordable rates at the other financial institutions. So this government has always looked out for the various strata of society, and this time it's the middle income. Sometimes we speak equity, and we fail to understand that we need to have friendly policies for different income levels in our country. And I noted with interest the interest in seeking to bring relief for the middle income. In the same way, we need to consider that there are people who would never be able to build their own homes, and that is why the government has different levels of policies for different strata of people. And different strata of people. And it has to do with what the Lord has endowed us with. When we speak equity, for example, if I am to look over a fence, a tall fence, I may need 3 stools. Caressa may need 3 too, and shanks. But Senator Maslin may need none at all. And that is what we are talking about when we talk about equity. And this is a measure specifically targeting the middle income people. So I heard Teacher Ernie talk of Senator John Finn speak to, that is for those who can afford it. It allows the middle income people to have an added income if they are so able. So it's not for the low income, it is specifically targeting the middle income people. That is the type of interventions we do. We do it with the different strata of society in mind. And yes, we're taking care of the low income who can't afford a home, and we are providing tax breaks for those who have invested, have a mortgage. So every homeowner who has a mortgage will benefit. Those with one home will benefit because it is moving from 25,000 per annum to 30,000 per annum. Those with an additional home will also benefit. So all mortgage owners are going to benefit from this intervention. And so in that regard, with these few comments, I conclude on the bill.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Income Tax Amendment Act 2020 be read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The bill will now be read a second time.
Income Tax Amendment Act 2020.
The bill now stands committed to a committee of the whole House to be considered clause by clause. House is in committee. House resumes. I have to report that the bill shortly entitled Income Tax Amendment Act 2020 passed the committee stage with minor amendment. The question is that the report of the committee on the bill be adopted. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
The bill has been read a third time and, sorry. Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill be read shortly entitled Income Tax Amendment Act 2020 be read a third time and passed.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Income Tax Amendment Act 2020 be read a third time and passed. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Income Tax Amendment Act 2020.
The bill has been read a third time and passed accordingly.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the second reading of the bill shortly entitled Offshore Banking Amendment Act 2020. Mr. Speaker, this Parliament would be very well aware of the effort being made by the Government of Dominica to comply with the demands of the European Union and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, in relation to tax matters. To date, the Parliament of Dominica has approved several amendments to the critical legislation, especially in respect to the Offshore Banking Act, the Fiscal Incentives Act, and the International Business Company Act. Among the requirements of the European Union is that Dominica signs on to the Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Framework, BEPS. And having signed on to this framework, Dominica must now comply with the requirements of it. The OECD continues to review Dominica's regime of taxes and has again requested further amendments to the Offshore Bank Act. Madam Speaker, this bill proposes some additional amendments to the Offshore Banking Act number 8 of 1996 to address the additional requirements of the EU and OECD. The amendments which are proposed include the repealing and replacement of Section 59A of the Act. The new provision is in respect of taxes applied to intellectual property assets within the context of the obligations to the OECD and the European Union. Intellectual property assets in this legislation means an intellectual property right, including copyright, design right, patent and trademark, and includes technical know-how, service mark, brand or image rights, and performance rights. Dominica has since been removed on the negative list of the EU, and the government will continue to cooperate with the international community on these and other fiscal matters. The OECD has confirmed that the proposed amendments will fulfill their current requirements. With these few words, Mr. Speaker, I commend the Offshore Bank Amendment Bill 2020 to the House for its consideration. I thank you.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Offshore Banking Amendment Act 2020 be read a second time. Those in favor? No, sorry. The bill is before the House for debate because nobody stood up, so yes, the bill is before the House for debate.
Let me thank all members, Mr. Speaker, and like we said before through the previous bill, that this is this is Dominica, the Commonwealth of Dominica rather is fulfilling its obligations to the international community. I thank you. Yeah.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Offshore Banking Amendment Act 2020 be read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Offshore Banking Amendment Act 2020.
The bill now stands committed to a committee of the whole House to be considered clause by clause. The question is that the report of the committee on the bill be adopted. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Offshore Banking Amendment Act 2020 be read a third time and pass.
Mr. Speaker, will you start down, man?
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Offshore Banking Amendment Act 2020 be read a third time and passed. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Offshore Banking Amendment Act 2020.
The bill has been read a third time and passed accordingly.
Act 2020.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, in 2015, the member states of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, ECCU, passed a new legislation to govern the operations and regulation of the banking sector. The act was intended to be a uniform act. Since its passage, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, ECCB, governments of various member states of the ECCU, as well as banks within the ECCU, have been assessing the application of the Act. As a result, it was determined that the amendments are necessary to further enhance the regulation of the sector. The suggested amendments to the Banking Act were proposed to and approved by the Monetary Council of the ECCB. The ECCB in turn proposed draft legislation to the member governments of the ECCU with a recommendation that the draft legislation be passed by parliaments in the respective jurisdictions. The draft submitted by the ECCB was reviewed by the Office of the Attorney General and is now being submitted for consideration of the Parliament. The bill contains 49 clauses. The amendments can be categorized into three broad areas. The first area refers to specific matters in the drafting in the parent legislation that needs to be clarified. The second area seeks to provide revised definitions of some terms, while the third area reflects changes which have been made on some policy issues. Mr. Speaker, in respect of drafting clarifications, it was noted that the certain provisions in the Act were identified as requiring amendment to ensure clarity of intent and consistency in language. Two examples of this are the following. An anomaly was identified in Section 5, where reference is made to conducting banking business. However, the term that is intended to be used throughout the Act and intended to use in all other areas of the Act is carrying on banking business. The use of the former terminology has the potential to create interpretational issues and therefore must be adjusted accordingly. Section 54 of the Act refers to licensed financial institutions that may acquire or establish a subsidiary company. In its current formulation, only future subsidiaries will be captured. However, the provision is intended to not only govern future subsidiaries, but also existing subsidiaries. The section would therefore be amended to give effect to that intent. It was also determined, Mr. Speaker, that some terms contained in the Act needed to be amended and that others should be added to the interpretation section of the Act to eliminate ambiguities. Key examples include the introduction of the term branch. This is significant as financial institutions will be expected to pay annual license fees for each branch that operates in the ECCU. 2, the replacement of the term capital base with the term tier 1 capital, as the latter term is a term which the industry is more familiar. 3, narrowing the definition of the term relative. The current expansive nature of the definition is problematic for the industry as securing compliance with regulations of the Act upon which this definition has some bearing is proving impractical and near impossible. Mr. Speaker, Some policy issues have also arisen during the implementation process that require policy adjustments. The first of these policies refer to financial requirements and limitations. The Act currently imposes limitations on certain individuals of banks, activities of banks, including the prohibitions on declaring or distributing dividends during any financial year that the licensed financial institution experiences a loss, restrictions on investments in real estate, and restrictions on unsecured lending to employees to 50% of the annual remuneration of the employee. The amendments now confer the discretion on the bank to grant approval to financial institutions to engage in the activities related to declarations of dividends and matters related to real estate. In the case of lending to employees, banks will be able to lend unsecured to employees up to 100% of employees' remuneration. In respect of policy matters related to audit and information, the current provisions on auditing require financial institutions to change their external auditors every 6 years, and the lead and concurring partner every 3 years. The current timeframes for rotation of external auditors were considered too short in light of the limited number of auditing firms without conflicts within the region. The amendment reverts to the previous position, which would allow financial institutions to change their external auditors every 9 years and the lead and concurring partner every 6 years. Based on the definition of foreign financial institutions in the Act, financial institutions that are CARICOM nationals but non-ECCU nationals would be considered foreign and therefore be subjected to higher license fees than local financial institutions, ECCU nationals, according to the fee structure. On the basis of the information of CARICOM, that the fee structure is inconsistent with the prohibition against discrimination based on nationality only under Article 7 of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, and that financial institutions incorporated within CARICOM but outside ECCU should not be charged higher fees than the ECCU counterparts. In an effort to ensure compliance with the existing treaty obligations of member states, the fee structure has been revised to allow CARICOM members, nationals, that are non-ECCU nationals to pay the same license fees as ECCU nationals. Mr. Speaker, among the other amendments proposed are the following. Clause 12 of the bill amends Section 44 of the Act, the minimum paid-up or assigned capital provision. The amendment will allow foreign branch banks to hold assigned capital in the currency union in the form of specified assets as defined in Section 57(7) of the Act, as approved by the Central Bank. Specific provisions on how to deal with the determination of who is fit and proper under the Act is given in this amendment. A person who has been declared bankrupt would be required to seek the prior approval of the bank to serve as a director or officer of a licensed financial institution. An appeals process for persons aggrieved by the decisions of the bank under the fit and proper provisions is introduced to the Act. Introduction to the Act of a process by which officers and directors could be vetted by the bank to determine compliance with the fit and proper criteria prior to appointment or nomination, election to boards of licensed financial institutions, respectively. Clause 44 of the bill amends Section 178, the secrecy of information provision. Section 178 provides for specific exceptions to the obligation to treat banking information as secret and confidential. The amendment would allow licensed financial institutions to disclose confidential information where necessary in the conduct of due diligence in relation to a potential transaction. This amendment will be particularly helpful to the Eastern Caribbean Asset Management Corporation, ECAMC. The ECAMC was established to assist banks deal with the issues of non-performing assets. The proposed amendment will provide the legal authority for a licensed financial institution to disclose confidential information to the ECAMC. Section 186 of the Banking Act is being amended to provide for 1. The establishment of a bridge bank for an initial period of 12 months with the possibility of extension by the ECCB for up to 4 years. 2. Specific circumstances under which bridge bank's status may automatically be terminated, that is, by inflection of time, sale to or amalgamation with another institution, or satisfaction of the capital requirements. 3. Mandatory receivership and liquidation only where bridge bank status terminates by inflection of time. And 4, retention of discretion by the ECCB to initiate receivership and liquidation even prior to the expiration of the period of the bridge bank. A consequential amendment is being proposed to Section 138, which is the receivership provisions. Clause 48 repeals and replaces Schedule 1 of the Act, while Clause 49 repeals and replaces Schedule 2 of the Act. Mr. Speaker, banking has become very challenging. The ECCB and the Monetary Council are cognizant of the need to ensure that the Banking Act provides an adequate framework for banks to operate and to make certain that we have a well-run and efficient sector, while ensuring that the needs of the citizens of the currency union are met. I trust that these amendments will receive the full support of the House. I therefore commend the bill to the House for its consideration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The bill is before the House for debate.
Mr. Speaker, through you, I thought we would hear from the Prime Minister, who is a member of the Monetary Council. And this, after all, started out as harmonized Eastern Caribbean Currency Union legislation. And when we debated this particular measure, this particular bill, this act, and passed this act in 2015, we were concerned on this side that we were rushing it. We were rushing it at the behest of some international organization that was breathing down our necks to have it done ASAP. It is clear now, 5 years later, that some more thought needed to have gone into this, because it cannot be that when you look at the drafting in the parent legislation that requires clarification or the revised definition of terms that have been dealt with, even in the policy changes that necessitated some of the amendments, that any of that surfaced within the last 5 years. We knew that. We knew all of these things 5 years ago, and yet we rushed the legislation through Parliament. Not only here in Dominica, it happened all around it. So I'm not saying this is not a Dominica problem. Right? And now we are coming to this Honorable House on the recommendation of the ECCU for 45 amendments to the piece of legislation, harmonized legislation that was passed in 2015. I hope that teaches some lessons about rushing legislation, even though it's at the behest of international organizations, because now these amendments have come from the same ECCU group with the blessings of the Monetary Council, having heard from industry players on the realities in which the Banking Act of 2015 was operating. Just wish to make those points for the record. Thanks.
I take note of the point, but one has to understand, this is a dynamic world. And this is why allowance was made for amendments to legislation. That no legislation in itself is perfect. And events will happen that will precipitate the need to either make policy decisions or legislative decisions in respect to these matters. I mean, when you look, for example, the issue of how do you treat with a CARICOM national vis-a-vis an OECS national, recognizing that you may have an OECS national who is also a member, a CARICOM national, but you may have a CARICOM national who is not an OECS national. But we are part of the concentric circle. And how do you treat with this situation and so forth? There were disagreements. There were different views from the OECS in respect to how we think we should be treating this situation. But at the end of the day, it just prevailed that we should give particular and specific consideration to CARICOM nationals. So we're sticking to clarify this. The whole issue of even concerns within the bank, where if you're an employee of the bank, you're a board member, there are certain limitations in respect to how much money you can borrow from the bank. That has posed a challenge to the banking, to people who work within the banking system, and also people who are on boards and so forth. So we're seeking to address this particular matter. So I have no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that in the next year or two, that we may come back here with further amendments, because this is a dynamic situation. The world is changing rapidly. The issue of de-risking, the issue of being able to do transactions in the bank and the challenges which are faced, and of course the positions by our international partners, and so we expect there to be amendments. So the amendments that were made in 2015 were necessary at the time, and the question is, should you have gone ahead with them, or should you have waited 5 years later, which could have compounded the situation and also placed the monetary union in some very difficult circumstances, because there are amalgamations taking place. There are issues of management concerns, issues of the fiduciary responsibility of board members, and with the, as I said, with regards to the risking and so forth, we have to be very careful as a monetary union. So we will see further amendments, I have no doubt. But those that were done in 2015 were not necessarily rushed, or neither could they have been deferred, because they were dealing with matters that were relevant and important at the time. And now we're here dealing with additional matters. And we're going to a Monetary Council meeting this week in St. Kitts. And we're surely going to have further conversations on this because the banking situation, I mean, in the Caribbean, in the world, has its own challenges, many of which are external to us and outside of our control and sphere of influence, Mr. Speaker. So I take note of it, but not to say that we need to have gone back then, and we need to go now. And I have no doubt we'll come back, because one of the things we have suggested to the Monetary Council is that with all of these amendments we're making, you know, should we not bring in a new piece of legislation? A new piece of legislation. But I guess maybe in the next year or two, we may very well see a new piece of legislation to replace the existing one, taking into consideration all of the attendant challenges which you have with the banking system. You know, when a minister speaks, he speaks on behalf of the government. So his words are my words, and my words are his words. So I didn't necessarily have to speak on your matter.
I commend the bill for favorable consideration of this House.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Banking Amendment Act 2020 be read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The bill will now be read a second time.
Banking Amendment Act 2020.
The bill now stands committed to a committee of the whole House to be considered clause by clause. House resumes, and I have to report that the bill shortly entitled Banking Amendment Act 2020 passed the committee stage with minor amendments. The question that the report of the committee on the bill be adopted. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Banking Amendment Act 2020 be read a third time and passed.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Banking Amendment Act 2020 be read a third time and pass. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Banking Amendment Act 2020.
The bill has been read a third time and passed accordingly.
Mr. Speaker, I move the second reading of the bill shortly entitled the Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Act 2020.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the government of the Commonwealth of Dominica prides itself of being progressive, proactive, and modern thinking. One of the most important goals of this Labour Party administration is to ensure a peaceful and safe Dominica. This aligns with the National Resilience Development Strategy of 2030 in several key areas, Mr. Speaker, especially the creation of safer communities, the creation of an attractive economic and social atmosphere for encouraging investors and foreign persons to make Dominica the homes and vacation destination, among other things. Mr. Speaker, the landscape of crime over the years has changed. Crimes such as money laundering and the use of proceeds of crime to finance crimes such as global terrorism and the trafficking in human guns and drugs have increased in recent times. Mr. Speaker, great progress has been made in modernizing our banking structures and banking mechanisms. The sophistication of our financial system has opened the doors to new risks of money laundering and terrorist financing. We need, therefore, better supervision and a more comprehensive policy to prevent loopholes in our laws. The Caribbean region, and therefore Dominica, are especially vulnerable to drugs and gun trafficking, especially as a transshipment point. As technology progresses, the world seems smaller and smaller, and everyone is closer together. The ability of criminals to effectively conceal the proceeds of the illegal activity is also becoming more modern, sophisticated, and harder to detect. Mr. Speaker, this is why it is incumbent upon us as a country to enact robust laws to ensure that the relevant organs of the state can effectively and efficiently execute their mandates in addressing these offenses. Mr. Speaker, today I present two pieces of legislation to this Honorable House in this regard: the Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Bill and the Proceeds of Crime Amendment Bill. Mr. Speaker, these bills are interrelated, but I'll seek to present them separately. The Money Laundering Bill This bill seeks to amend the Money Laundering Act number 8 of 2011. The acts provide for the prevention of money laundering and other related matters geared in making the country a safer destination for transacting business. This is tied into Dominica's goals of becoming a safe place for investment and investors. Section 2 expands the scope of the Act by adding the definition of certain financial institution. The definition of central bank, banking business, and a bank are inserted in the definition of the section of the Act. Section 7 of the Act is of particular importance, Mr. Speaker. Section 7 of the former Act is repealed and replaced by this section, which establishes the Financial Services Unit as a money laundering supervisory authority of financial institutions and persons carrying on scheduled business in Dominica. I want to take this moment here, Mr. Speaker, to emphasize the importance of this section globally, the need for greater compliance and anti-money laundering rules, and the need for better enforcement. Mr. Speaker, as emphasized by the European Union, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank has issued money laundering guidelines notes which are expected to complement the legislation within member states. Dominica has taken a stance to ensure that there is an authority dedicated to anti-money laundering activities. Section 13 and 15 of the Act are amended to indicate the payment of pecuniary penalties into the consolidated funds. Mr. Speaker, a new section 15 is included in this amendment. This new section is to be inserted immediately after section 15. According to the sections, section 8, 9, 10, and 11, and 13 apply with similar effect to the Banking Supervisory Authority in relation to banks and reference financial institutions and persons carrying on scheduled business is to be construed as reference to the banks. A new section 15 redefines the term financial institution to mean a bank or any person whose regular occupation or business is the carrying on of any activities listed in Part 1 of the schedule. The schedule is also amended by this legislation, Mr. Speaker. This amendment shows the responsiveness of this government to the ever-changing global and regional local crime situations, Mr. Speaker. I therefore, Mr. Speaker, commend this bill to this honorable House. Mr. Speaker,
the bill is before the House for the debate.
There is no need to debate this very important matter before this House. Over the years, Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition has made some progress thus far, and I hope that we can keep this wonderful spirit going forward as we debate matters of national importance to this country, Mr. Speaker. Over the years, this administration has passed tremendous pieces of legislation to combat money laundering. And I want to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to already commend the staff members of the Financial Investigation Unit, FIU, and they have done a splendid job over the years. For matter of fact, the FIU in Dominica has been rated by the US and many other international organizations as one of the best in the Caribbean. And I want to commend them for that, Mr. Speaker. And to say further, Mr. Speaker, that, that thus far we have in a special account, as afforded by law, the forfeiture account, well over $2.9 million. And that will be, Mr. Speaker, re-injected into actually fighting crime and making the FIU and the police department more effective in carrying on the function, Mr. Speaker. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Act 2020 be read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The bill is now read a second time.
Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Act 2020.
Or the procedures of crime? Because you didn't. Okay. So let's repeat it.
Okay.
So hold on,
Proceeds
Danny.
of Crime Amendment Act 2020.
Danny, for the record, let me do it over. Yes.
Yeah.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 2020 be read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The bill will not be read a second time.
Okay.
I want to just we just read the money laundering prevention. What happened is that there was a mistake which I brought to the attention of the clerk earlier on. And one of the pages were actually missing from the document, and it was corrected. So I guess other members don't have that corrected page. So we just did the money laundering.
So I would ask that we've just strike out what just happened, and we are going back to the money laundering, because that's what I went with. So it has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Act 2020 be read a second time. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The bill will now be read a second time.
Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Act 2020.
The bill now stands committed to a committee of the whole House to be considered clause by clause. House resumes. I have to report that the bill shortly entitled Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Act 2020 passed the committee stage without amendment. The question is that the report of the committee on the bill be adopted. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled the Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Act 2020 be read a third time and passed.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Act 2020 be read a third time and passed. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Money Laundering Prevention Amendment Act 2020.
The bill has been read a third time and passed accordingly.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled the Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 2020 be read a second time.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, as I said before in my presentation on the amendment of the Money Laundering Act, the intention of this act is of paramount importance. The proceeds of crime is the term given to money or assets gained by criminals during the course of the criminal activities. In this instance, Mr. Speaker, it points to the insidious activities surrounding illegal amassing of wealth. Mr. Speaker, it is amassing of an illegal fortune and then attempting to wash it in the guise of legal activities. It usually gives rise to a habit and culture of using these ill-gotten gains to finance more criminal activities and is used to finance illegal lifestyles and activities. Mr. Speaker, in our region, these illegal funds are usually used to purchase illegal firearms, purchase and move drugs, and further the goals of trafficking in illegal firearms, substance, and even humans, and in general, lends to moral decay and decline in society. As the world, Mr. Speaker, struggle to contend with the threat posed by violent extremist groups, it is important to combat transnational crime in our region. Transnational criminal organizations and criminal syndicates operate, Mr. Speaker, sophisticated drug and human trafficking networks and smuggling operations in the region, and therefore contributing to significant increase in violent crime. This is why, Mr. Speaker, this bill cannot be separated from the money laundering bill. This is why, Mr. Speaker, they go hand in hand. Mr. Speaker, the Dominican Labour Party manifesto, we gave the promise to take this country forward, and we have pledged to make Dominica not only a prosperous nation, not only a country that is prosperous economically, but a wholesome country built on solid moral values. Mr. Speaker, the proceeds of crime is the term given to money or assets gained by criminals during the course of their criminal activity. Every action, therefore, that is taken to make it harder for illegally obtained funds to be hidden will also make it harder to use these funds to further financing crimes and criminal behavior. In this bill, Mr. Speaker, changes have been made to Section 2 and 60 of the Proceeds of Crime Act. Of particular note is the changes made in the administrative penalties, Mr. Speaker, collected by the unit of this Act within the Money Laundering Prevention Act 2011. The banking authority referred to in this Act is the Money Laundering Supervisory Authority established under Section 7.2 of the Money Laundering Prevention Act. And this Act and the Money Laundering Act presented here today, Mr. Speaker, is part of the creation of a robust system of laws to arrest this growing increase of money laundering activities to ensure that criminals do not benefit from the proceeds of crime. Mr. Speaker, I therefore commend this bill to this honorable House for debate.
The bill is before the House for debate.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Proceeds of crime. Assets gained by criminals in the course of criminal activity. Assets gained by criminals in the course of criminal activity, which they invariably seek to wash in the guise of legal activity. Mr. Speaker, this particular amendment, the two amendments that we're dealing with here this afternoon, to the money laundering legislation and the proceeds of crime legislation, are particularly important to Dominica, especially under this Labour Party government. There was a decision in the court of Iran late last year where a gentleman by the name of Ali Reza Monfared was convicted for theft, embezzlement of billions of dollars from the state of Iran. He was jailed for 20 years, and he was ordered to repay the state of Iran 1.3 billion US dollars. In the normal course of things, that has nothing to do with us, except that Ali Reza Monfared was the holder of a Dominica diplomatic passport, a citizen of the Commonwealth of Dominica, who, from the evidence that is known to the world right now, used that Dominica citizenship and Dominica diplomatic status in his money laundering scheme.
No, the member Honorable Lennox Linton, please withdraw that. You'll be putting the state in disrepute internationally. Whether
was Ali Reza Monfared the holder of a Dominica
whatever the
passport?
man action is, you cannot put the state involved. You would have any Dominican could it be involved in a problem or a crime. So you cannot come to this honorable house and impute improper motive as if the government will be part and parcel of that. So I would ask you to withdraw it.
No, Mr. Speaker, I'm not withdrawing a statement of fact.
No.
Ali Reza Monfared
Yeah, what you said.
is the holder of a Dominica citizenship, which he obtained on the Dominica Citizenship by Investment Program, and he was at the material time also the holder of a Dominica diplomatic passport.
But you said,
I will not withdraw it.
hold on, you said he used it.
Yes, he did.
No. If a Dominican has a passport,
You want us to go?
no, that's why I'm asking you. The debate was very nice earlier today.
My brother, enjoy yourself.
Nice.
Enjoy yourself. Let it go. Let's sing Kumbaya. Kumbaya, Lord, Kumbaya. You sing Kumbaya, Lord, Kumbaya.
campaign financing.
You hear that now?
For campaign financing.
Mr.
No,
Speaker.
no.
Said that he would bring the money in on a humanitarian purposes to fund his campaign, you know. And you want to come here as if you're Pontius Pilate.
So, Honorable Prime Minister, since we said the debate passed, you know, I would ask you to withdraw it,
But,
and let's leave it alone.
Mr. Speaker,
Yes.
just on the side.
Yes,
So
okay.
It's on the record.
Okay, all right.
But
He said it was a side, his mic wasn't on.
I was on my feet.
No, he's on his feet.
I was on my feet.
Okay, Mr. Speaker. I rise to, Mr. Speaker, I rise to close this debate. I know. Mr. Speaker, there's a saying that goes that way. People of glass windows. There's a saying, Mr. Speaker, that goes that way. People of glass windows should not throw stones. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to wind up this debate. Mr. Speaker, I've been in law enforcement all my life, so I want to calm there. Mr. Speaker, I want you to say, Mr. Speaker, that this is a very important measure. And it's ironical that the leader of the opposition is making those points because you may recall, Mr. Speaker, that before the Labour Party came into office, there was no financial intelligence unit. There was no anti-money laundering act or legislation, pieces of legislation. For matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, you may recall that Dominica was blacklisted because the party at the time in office said there was no need to enact any anti-money laundering legislation. And there was no need, Mr. Speaker, to have any unit to specifically, Mr. Speaker, investigate issues relating to money laundering. For matter of fact, the then Minister of Finance and the officials within Customs and the Ministry of Finance had varying views as to whether money laundering actually existed in Dominica. So it's the Labour Party administration, being in office now, that has taken the time, Mr. Speaker, to enact all the requisite pieces of laws to mitigate against money laundering and criminals, of course, benefiting from the process of crime. So I am very, very, very taken aback by the leader of the opposition, Mr. Speaker. This matter is before the Honourable House, Mr. Speaker, and I close this debate.
So it has been moved. It has been moved and seconded that. Order. I think we can focus on the substantive matter because that will create a blaze in the parliament. So yes, so honorable members, I join that it has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 2020 be read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The bill will now be read a second time.
Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 2020.
The bill now stands committed to a committee of the whole House to be considered clause by clause. House resumes. I have to report that the bill shortly entitled Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 2020 passed the committee stage without amendment. The question is that the report of the committee on the bill be adopted. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled the Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 2020 be read a third time and pass.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 2020 be read a third time and passed. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 2020.
The bill has been read a third time and passed accordingly.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House be suspended until 6:30 this evening.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that the House be suspended up to 6:30 until 6:30. 6:30? Yes, 6:30 this evening. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. House stands suspended until 6:30 this evening.